Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. Each episode will bring you a new topic or interview related to brain health and wellness as part of my mission to help you on the path to a healthier, happier brain. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. My guest today is Jennifer Soames. Jennifer is a traumatic brain injury survivor and advocate, author, former holistic health practitioner, and yoga instructor. She is passionate about helping those affected by TBI get the information, care, and support they need to live their best life, even with a new normal. She understands firsthand the pain, grief, frustration, loneliness, and other challenges of living with a life-altering trauma, chronic debilitating illness, becoming disabled, losing one's sense of self and purpose, and the post-traumatic growth that also comes from these experiences. Outside of teaching and writing, Jennifer enjoys being in nature, traveling, and spending time with her husband, family, friends, and animals. She lives out near Seattle, Washington, and we're here in Minnesota. So similar climate sometimes, not so much. Every time I've been out to Seattle, it never rains. So that whole thing about Seattle being rainy, I never see it when I'm there.
You're lucky. But yes, we have beautiful summers, absolutely beautiful summers.
Yes. So thank you so much for being here today, Jennifer. We got to connect before the show and felt like we were fast friends because we've been through similar situations and we kind of came up with some similar topics. So I'm really excited to have you here today and discuss the things that we're going to talk about today.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited too.
Yeah. So I always like to start off getting people's kind of backstory. So we know you're a TBI survivor. Can you tell me a little bit about however much you want to share, to what brought you where you are today?
So I'll try to keep it short, but everyone always wants to know, well, how did it happen? So back in 2013, I was in a horseback riding lesson. And even though I have been involved with horses since I was a kid, horses spook, and that's what happened rather in this lesson. And I came off horse wearing my helmet, and I definitely incurred a concussion then. More to that story, but for sake of time, I got back on after we determined that I didn't have any broken bones and ended on a good note, just super easy. But I knew that I had a concussion when I was driving home because I just kept getting increasingly tired and ridiculously so. And I really didn't want to go to the ER because I was worried about the cost, even with insurance. And I was like, well, what are they going to do for me anyway? So the next morning, I actually went and saw one of my chiropractors and one of my colleagues for some craniosacral therapy. And my colleague, she convinced me to go to the ER to get a CT scan to make sure I didn't have any internal bleeding. And I was like, all right, for you, I'll do it. Right. That's like where I was and how well I valued my brain at the time. And on the way home from that, my husband, of course, driving, we were just 3 miles shy of being home, and we were going through an intersection. We had the green light, and someone coming in the opposite direction turned left immediately in front of us. My husband tried to avoid hitting them, but unfortunately, physics was once again not on my side in a 25-hour period. So we had a car accident on the way home from the ER. And that set off a whole domino effect that has continued to evolve and grow in the last almost 10 and a half years.
Mm-hmm. That's we always warn people about that, more so with kids in sports, that we don't want them to get that second impact syndrome, having another concussion right on top of one that they're still trying to recover from. And you were still in the diagnosis phase of yours
Right.
when you got that second one on top of it. So I can't even imagine what that felt like, having another trauma on top of the one you were already trying to recover from.
Yeah. And to make it even more complex, I had just finished accident-related treatment for another car accident in which I had been passenger almost exactly a year prior. So I called my attorney on Monday because this happened on a Friday and Saturday, and I said, I have another one for you. So yeah, wow. But little did I know, because the doctors at the ER handed me a 2-page handout and said, you'll be fine in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Little did I know how wrong they were. And I can
Mhm.
tell you almost 10.5 years later, that I was not fine,
Yeah.
but didn't really know that until probably a couple months later when I really knew that I was not okay. And subsequently just ended up year after year kind of getting more and more diagnoses of related things that nobody told me about. And that included things like PTSD and depression, pituitary damage, dysautonomia, chronic fatigue syndrome. And these things led to me having to file for disability and close my practice. I had a bodywork practice of 12 years, 14-year career, and had to close that in January of 2020. So in a way, I feel like I dodged a bullet a little bit.
Yeah.
And then even in 2022, getting an additional diagnosis of craniosacral instability, which is likely the cause of my dysautonomia and chronic fatigue syndrome. So it keeps unfolding even now.
It's just the gift that keeps on giving.
It is. Or as some have said, the gift that keeps on taking. But
Yeah.
it's both. I will say that it is both.
Yeah. There have definitely been times in my recovery in the last year that there have been blessings for sure, but the even with the gift that keeps giving, it keeps giving you more diagnoses because you keep finding more
True.
layers. As you pull back one layer, then other things become more obvious. I've found.
This is a
So
giant onion.
it is.
Yes.
It is. I guess that's a good thing I like onions, but I didn't think I'd become one at some point.
True.
Um, so along this journey, it's been 10.5 years. What kind of resources did you need to help you at different phases?
Lots. It included my healthcare team of body workers, chiropractors, a functional neurologist, multiple physicians, neuroendocrinologist, neuropsychologist, therapists, and certainly more. But those are some of my team members on my healthcare team. And I needed multiple attorneys, both for my auto accident cases and also for the disability process. But I will say that the resource that was both most needed and often most lacking was community and also empathy. It was only 2 years ago, after doing this for 8 years, that I finally joined a brain injury support group, and that has become a really important part of my life since.
Hmm. Yeah, I haven't gotten quite to that point yet myself, but I can see how that would be definitely a tough thing to kind of step into. 8 years. Okay, we'll see. The next seven bring me.
There you
Um,
go.
did you go to a non-functional neurologist at any point too?
I did not.
Okay, because I'm curious what the difference would have looked like. So curious what it would have looked, how that those diagnoses might have been different from one to the other. Because I've worked with neurologists who I now know practice more of functional neurology, and with those that do not, and it's typically a little more open-minded on the functional medicine side of
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
Even in the neurology world, not even the whole wellness aspect of everything else, but just a little bit more options with that functional
Yeah.
side of things.
And people would ask me, like, you're doing what with your functional neurologist? Because I will say he had me doing things that seemingly didn't make sense to me at the time. Um, but I will say it was very helpful. Things like
Mhm.
balance and um, helping me to regulate my emotions a bit better because that was really not controlled well early on. My
Mhm.
poor husband, but he deserves a medal. But he really did help me with those things, and we worked a lot together in the first about 4 to 6 months, sometimes daily, even for weeks. And so it was a lot, but it was very helpful.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm so glad that I got into functional medicine, involved in it several years ago, because that's opened up a whole new different world of healthcare that I didn't know about. And I've been in healthcare for 25 years now. So
For sure.
yeah, yeah, very cool. So one of the things that we were talking about before we came on this recording was kind of that whole piece of being strong through all of this and
Hmm.
what kind of our definitions was. So how has your personal definition of strength changed since your brain injury?
Yeah, really good question. I'm glad that we had an opportunity to talk about this. Before my injuries, I thought I was strong, and I was. been through a lot of things in my life, and I was already pretty independent, but I had to learn that being strong included asking for and also receiving help, as well as not keeping all my emotions and feelings bottled up. Like, there was this kind of persona of like, oh yeah, I've got it all together, and uh, I thought that that was like how I was supposed to be if I was strong, and that I could do it all on my own. How wrong I was. And so now, for me, strong includes being vulnerable. I've learned that share all the like snotty, icky, grief laden kind of stuff, because that's part of the journey. And um, it's so important to do that as part of being strong. It's like you have to have those breakdowns
Mhm.
to continue being as strong as you can possibly be. But it really for me was based on like I had to receive help. I had to ask for help and receive it because I thought being independent was being strong, and it's like no, um, that's not the case.
Mhm. Yeah, similar on this end of the Zoom call here. Absolutely. I think I kind of likened strong to being resilient in the past.
Mm,
And I actually, after my last divorce, I got a tattoo on my arm that says strength. So, I was
yeah.
kind of the queen of being strong, or quote unquote strong on that. And I was a fitness instructor for a while, and uh, health coach. I did all the things that
Hmm.
had me strong in both my eyes and other people's eyes. But in the whole process of recovery, I had a few people, and I think we had similar stories on this one. A few people saying, "Well, you're so strong, you can get through anything."
Yes.
And I'm sure we both at some point felt like I didn't feel very strong.
Hmm.
I With everything that just all those layers, the onion that
Yeah.
kept unpeeling itself, it was like, how much more of this do I have to take?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a point where you don't want to be strong. It just
Absolutely.
and as you're going through, why do you think that would be? Why would we not want to be strong?
Well, for me, being strong, like in our culture, has this connotation of being some comic book superhero, right? This is like you can do it all without a problem. Like you have all your shit together, and it's this false idea of what the human experience is. And being strong is exhausting, period. But I had this idea today that being strong in this way is like being asked to stand on one leg for an undeterminable amount of time, asking constantly, like, am I done yet? And having people walk by and say, oh, you're so strong, but not actually give you the support that you need to hold yourself up. And I don't always want to live up to the image that people have of me being strong because it's like I need that support. And sometimes I don't want to hold myself up anymore. I need to be held up and supported. And I know in talking with many TBI folks that that is what is often lacking the most on a general level. Obviously, everyone's in their experience, but that's kind of why I got tired of hearing like, oh, you're so strong. And it's just like, well, yes, thank you. And like, can someone just hold me up,
Yeah,
please?
yeah, yeah. I love that description of standing on one leg, because it is kind of what you feel like, is you don't have the support of the other leg, but other people don't see that. They just see how well you're standing on that one leg.
They're like, yeah, doing great.
Yeah,
Right. And like keep walking. And it's like, wait, come back.
yeah, yeah. That's a really good way to describe it, actually. And because it is, for several months, for the first several months that I was going through mine, I didn't want to admit that I wasn't what I was before, despite the fact that I didn't even know that I had all these symptoms. So, having worked in neurology as long as I did, you would think that I knew, but because of the injury, I was not aware of all the problems that I even
Sure.
had. So, first off, I didn't even know that I had them to tell anybody else. But even when I did identify that they were there, I just kept thinking that it wasn't going to last very long. No, it's not going to be that long. I'll work through it rather than burden everybody else with the problems that I was having and making it seem like I'm not strong, because I'm supposed
Mm-hmm.
to be the strong one.
Mm-hmm.
So then that kind of backfired. Because when you don't open up to everybody around you, then they don't know your struggles and they don't know that you even need help.
Exactly. Yep. And I definitely had that experience of not wanting to be a burden. And, I've talked with my husband, he's never believed for one moment that I was a burden with all of this and all the things that we've been through together. It's like, no, he never thought that. So I projected that onto myself, and that was something that wasn't true. And so I had to do a lot of inner work to work with that and release it and be like, no, I'm not a burden. Like, these are just the facts of my reality, and this is just how it is.
Mhm.
That's all that anybody else sees too. So it's like, oh, well, then why do I think that? So I had to really have a, you know, wake up call for myself on how I perceive myself.
Yeah. So I have a couple more questions on strength, but I'm going to take a sidetrack for a second
Yeah.
because I have been still trying to get over that whole burden piece. What was it that helped you kind of come to the fact that these are just facts and that you're not a burden? 'Cause personally, I would like to know, and I'm sure that some of our listeners would
Yeah.
too.
Well, my husband has just been really so supportive throughout all of this. He made it really clear that I didn't choose any of this.
Yeah.
None of this was a choice. So it's not my fault, right? It's like I didn't have any culpability in what happened. Like, yes, I fell from a horse, but she spooked. So, things happen. Um, but knowing that it wasn't any fault of my own, that this was just these were accidents and they just happened. They happened for people. And there wasn't anything that I did wrong or that I deserved any of this. Because for a while I thought I deserved all this for some reason. Like, oh, I'm not good enough, and somehow it was my fault and I deserve this. And it's like, no, this just happened. And taking myself kind of out of all that and seeing it just for what it is, uh, really helped. And just realizing that, like, these are just all the repercussions. These are all the things that I experienced as a result of the brain injury. There are the things that I experienced as a result of all the other diagnoses that I have. These are just the facts. And that helps remove the emotional component for it and just go, oh, yeah, that's true. Right.
Mhm.
So all that was really helpful.
How long did it take you to get to that point?
Oh, good question. It was not quick.
Mhm.
I would say probably a few years. The first several years were the hardest for me. Probably the first three, especially 3 to 5, but I think definitely the first three were the hardest. And by about then, I had thankfully and still have wonderful therapists, wonderful friends, some of whom are coaches, and a lot of really great, positive, and very real people in my life too, who can call me out on things like that and give me the reality checks that I need from time to time. So it takes time for people, and this is not a quick journey. It's one that everyone will go on at their own pace. And even though it took me 3 years, it might take somebody 3 weeks, it might take somebody 3 decades. So it's not a race and it's not a contest, and everybody's going to go at their own pace.
Yeah. I've struggled with that part too.
And
I've
that's
learned
okay.
I've learned in all of this that I'm more competitive than I thought I ever was. And as a like I said, as a provider before this all happened, I would see people of varying lengths of recovery. Some that got better in a matter of days, weeks, months, years. Some that I had seen had their injuries decades ago, and they were how they were, and
Hmm.
they didn't get everything back, and everything in between. So there's a wide variety in that recovery. As you said, it is very individual. So you can't really look
Absolutely.
at somebody else that's had even the same kind of TBI. We were both in car accidents. Sounds like similar descriptions. Um, but our stories are still different. We have
Yeah.
similarities, and that
Hmm.
everybody that I've talked to that's been through a TBI has there are similarities, but everybody's story is different, and that's the part I keep trying to remind myself on
Hmm.
through all of this is that it is not a competition. But man, I sure would like to get better as quickly as some other people have.
Yeah. And everybody wants it yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Uh, the patience is one of the things that I have been forced to learn.
Mhm.
I've gotten better at it, for sure. It's a practice,
Mhm.
but I definitely wanted everything to quote, like, go back to the way it was. And that's not possible. You can't go back in anything.
Yeah.
You can choose to stay stuck where you are, or you can choose to move forward in some way, however that looks to that person in the moment.
Mhm.
Which is going to change from moment to moment and person to person, right? So it's not stagnant by any means, but you can't go back and you can't necessarily speed it up as much as you want to. Time, especially when it comes to bodies, and I know this well, having worked with people and particularly in chronic pain for 14 years, it takes time. Some things are really fast, and some things do happen quickly, but others take time, and we have to allow that.
Mhm. Even though the injury happens in a split second, the recovery
Yes.
does not.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So thanks for bearing with me on that little sidetrack because I think that was an important point to make as well.
Hmm.
And even when we connected before, we kind of went down the discussion of grief, which you have talked about on multiple different platforms. So
Yes.
that's still a thing, and that's probably part of this whole process of strength is kind of getting past that grief stage, which I'm pretty sure I'm still in the anger phase right now. But
Well, I wouldn't say getting past it. I would say staying in it.
yeah.
Because you don't ever arrive when it comes to processing grief. There isn't an arrival because it's a continual process that I like to describe as waves.
Mhm.
And it comes and goes in waves, and it's not linear. It is very much like the waves on any body of water. Sometimes it's just these little ripples, and like, oh, yeah, there it is. And other times it's a full-on tsunami that bombards you and, metaphorically crashes you to the ground.
Mhm.
So, again, that takes as long as it needs to take to get through any of it. And then you go back into some other aspect of it, go back into anger. And then you're like, all right, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I'm moving more to acceptance of this. And then it's like something will trigger it and you'll experience waves of it. So um yeah, it's staying in it. And that's where I had to really become okay being vulnerable
Mhm.
because I thought me being strong, like, oh, I don't have any of that to process. I had a lot of grief to process and I'm still processing that all the time, but it gets easier. And I've had a lot of help with that too.
Yeah.
It has definitely not been something I have done completely on my own.
I'm sure that it takes a village to recover from a TBI.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so kind of getting back to that whole strength thing. So being being vulnerable, going through grief, all of that makes you feel not so strong at times. And
Hmm.
then we've got people around us that say we are so strong. Um, are there things that you found that were beneficial or that you wished people would have said instead of telling you that you're so strong?
I got such a timely email from one of my former colleagues and teachers. We were corresponding a little bit and I was giving her some updates. And she really hit the nail on the head. And she wrote, I'm so glad you found your way through this far. And I'm glad you found the wherewithal to keep progressing. I'm sure there must have been dark and hard days. And that was just like, it was so refreshing to hear that. And it felt like I had finally been seen.
Mhm.
I also know this person pretty well, I've known them for a long time, and so I also know that they get it in their own experience. But what they wrote acknowledges both the effort that I've made as well as the dark and the hard days, like they said. And it's really honoring the human experience with it. And I think that's what hit me so much in reading this was just like, oh, it finally honors and sees my humanity rather than this comic book, Wonder Woman, figure. It's like, I love that acknowledgement. And even in some of my messages to friends who are going through some things, it's like saying to them very similar things. I so appreciate that you keep moving forward, even with the dark and the hard times that are still there. So I love that inclusion of all of it.
Mhm. Mhm. That is really kind of mind blowing. I do. I love that as well. That's also really cool. So I laugh at the Wonder Woman a little bit because I have this sign that I picked up
Oh,
years
nice.
ago Yeah, I'm not saying I'm Wonder Woman. I'm just saying that no one has ever seen me and Wonder Woman in the same room.
Love it.
So that whole idea of being a superhero, that was my life. That's what I lived. What I love is that my kids still think that I'm kind of a superhero. They still think I'm Wonder Woman, even though I've definitely shown that I have flaws and I am very human. And I think some of the favorite things that I've heard um, have been from my kids when they just say, "Mom, it's all right. We love you. You're fine. I don't see any problem." And I love when they do that because it doesn't make me feel
Beautiful.
like I have to be anything specific.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I had a few people that would comment and they're like, "You know what? I'm sorry you're going through this. This sucks."
Yeah.
And I loved those comments way more than the people that would say, "You've got this. You can get through this." Because
Hmm.
a couple weeks ago, I had a really tough day, and it was the anniversary of
Mm,
the. So at the time of this recording, it's going to be a little bit longer than that, but
yeah.
at the time of this recording, I had just passed that 1 year mark from the
Mm,
accident, and it was hitting me harder than I wanted it to, and I was
yeah.
cranky and upset, and um, I was arguing in times that I wouldn't normally argue. And I ended up just having to go and went to my favorite restaurant down the road and enjoyed a really good cider because I can't drink beer, but a really, really good
Nice.
adult beverage. And I made a social media post out of it. I'm like, you know what? This is what happens when you getting close to your 1 year mark and you're not where you want to be. And keep all the positive. You got those things out away because right now I don't got this. And
Hmm.
I got some of the most validating responses from that too. And they're like, it's okay. Have your days, enjoy your drink.
Hmm.
You've earned it. That's fine. And there was no, oh, you've got this anyway. So I'm so
Yeah.
glad, I'm glad that I didn't get
Excellent.
any of that because it was exactly what I needed at the time that I needed it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where we need that validation and that empathy and not toxic positivity.
Yeah.
I'm done with toxic positivity. I will not accept it. I will not use it because it doesn't help anybody. The only person that usually helps is the person saying it,
Yeah.
but it has nothing to do with the person on the receiving end. And what we don't do well in our culture, what we haven't learned to do well as a whole, is to be able to be present in someone else's suffering without needing or wanting to change it because it makes you uncomfortable.
Yes.
And if you can just sit with me and be in that muck and all that, all that gritty stuff, you can just sit there, not try to change anything, not try to cheer me up. Oh, you're depressed. Oh, just think happy thoughts.
Yeah.
You
Doesn't work
might
like that.
get some uh, hand gestures that you may not appreciate. Um, but it's like, can we just be present with one another without needing to change anything and just to bear witness? And that is
Yeah.
what is so missing for a
Yeah.
lot of us and for our culture in general.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I did have somebody one day tell me that I needed to think more positive. I'm like, I'm positive this sucks. How about that?
I love it. That is awesome.
I'm like, that's all you're getting from me right now. I am positive this sucks.
Oh, I absolutely love that. That is the best comeback.
Like I've got nothing else at this point. I can't think positive because there are times that you're going through this and you're at the bottom of the crater.
Mhm.
There's not any sign of positivity in the radius right around you.
Yeah.
And 5 minutes from now, there might be again,
Mhm.
because my emotions have been bipolar this last year. Oh my
Oh
gosh.
yeah. And all that is normal. And especially I came to find out after being diagnosed with depression after about the first anniversary.
Yeah,
I didn't know that that was normal.
yeah,
It's like, oh, change you damage your brain, you change your neurochemistry.
yeah.
And if I had known all that stuff was normal, that would have been really helpful because it takes some of the stigma away. Uh, but it's like, oh yeah, especially when you're dealing with things like post-traumatic stress and um, depression, well, there are neurochemical, biological things happening that are contributing to all of that. So it's not just a character flaw
Yeah.
or something like that. It's not, again, like you're choosing it. No, there's some stuff going on in your brain that is having really big effects.
Oh heck
So
yeah.
again, like when you recognize that and when you really take that in, it's like, oh, it takes so much of the pressure off right? It's
Yep.
like, oh yeah, that's going on. That's making me feel this way and say things that I didn't intend to.
Yeah.
But it's giving yourself that grace too, especially when you know that it's not because of things that you're choosing to do.
Exactly. Exactly. So by the time this show comes out, I'll tell people that are listening, go back a couple of months. There's another guest that's coming on that will be on by this point, that we talked about depression. We kind of really
Mm,
went deep into the
good,
conversation
good.
because it's not it's not something that you in your healthy brain state would do.
Hmm.
It's when we have an injury. So when we have the injury, we always talk about TBI being kind of this invisible disability, right? Because nobody can see it.
Right.
Maybe initially, if you had a fracture or something along with
Yeah,
it, yeah,
yeah.
sure, you got the cast, people can see it. You get the sympathy from people because you have a visible thing that they can see that you have something injured. But people can't see your brain injury. But even if we kind of say that, sure, you kind of, even if we liken it to a bruise, so you bruised your brain, whatever, it's not just the physical change. Those changes when we damage our brain, it does affect our neurochemistry. It changes the hormones in our brain, how they respond to things, how we respond to illness, even. Um,
Hmm.
I don't I don't manage temperature changes like I used to. So
Hmm.
going from hot to cold, that's a huge stress on my system where it wasn't
Yep.
before. So all of those little things that we can't see, it's kind of a spiral. One thing happens and then it affects the other parts of your body and the hormones get
Hmm.
affected. You mentioned your pituitary was
Yep.
injured as well. So
Yep.
that creates so many of the hormones in our body that have responsibilities up for pretty much everything that runs us.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
so then you can imagine it's affecting every part of your body. So you've
Yeah,
damaged your brain, but it's just so much more than just that.
exactly. Yep.
And
I
yeah,
see this as like flow chart is like you have all these different things, and then each one is followed by all of the symptoms for each one.
yeah,
And it's like a big family tree, right?
yeah,
The family tree you didn't want.
yeah,
But it keeps growing, right? Because each diagnosis that I have has a whole list of symptoms.
yeah.
And they affect me in all different ways. And some of them overlap, so it can be really difficult to know what's what.
Mhm.
Other things are different, so it is that gift that keeps giving, but it keeps giving me information
Yeah.
and definitely teaching me all the time. Every year, learning something new, that's for sure. Whether I wanted to or not. And a lot of times, like, I don't want to learn anything more, but that's
Yeah.
part of my journey, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to say anytime I got some new medical thing that was going wrong with me, that God was just giving me more opportunity to have empathy for my patients. But I've
Yes.
said on multiple times during this whole journey that I didn't need this big of a lesson. I'm pretty sure I could have caught some of these things with a smaller lesson. But yeah, here we
Yeah,
are
I
living the
thought so
dream.
too, but apparently for whatever reason, this is how I needed to learn what I have learned so far and will continue to learn. So, however we need to learn it, unfortunately, yeah, this
Yep.
was not a fun way to do it, but here we are.
Yeah. Yep. And I know I've had previous guests on my show. A couple of them kind of stick out that they have said that it's not so much that God only gives you what you can handle. God gives things to people that he knows can do something with it. So you and I both are now on this journey to help other people that have had
Mhm.
TBI and how we can recover from it. You wrote a book about this
Great.
experience so that you can share it. Can
Yes.
you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my book is called Head of Hope, a resource and empowerment guide for living and thriving with a traumatic brain injury. And it really came out of me being a holistic health professional for many years before this came out, and knowing that even with my knowledge, which I'm pretty smart, and I knew a lot of people who knew people, and I had so much difficulty even kind of figuring out where to start on this path and getting an idea of who could help. And I figured, if I didn't know who to see, what could help, or any of that, then I can only imagine how difficult it is for the average Joe out there who has no background in any of this, who does not have these connections. And so I thought, well, I've got all this information. Let's share it and give people an idea of what are some of the treatment options out there, both allopathic and holistic, things that people have likely never heard of. But also just to share my story so that people know what is possible in terms of like, these are some of the things you could experience, like depression, like post-traumatic stress, like pituitary damage, all this kind of stuff that nobody told me about. Nobody set me up for it. And I'm having to figure all of this out mostly on my own. I mean, my providers were there with me, but a lot of times I'm the one bringing this to my providers and saying, yeah, I think this is an issue for me. So a lot of it's been self-advocacy, but also sharing, how do you become a good advocate for yourself? And these are all the things that I've gone through so that you don't have to suffer as much.
Mhm.
Like, learn from my experience so that yours can be hopefully suck less. Let's put it that way. We'll say a little bit better, but let's help it suck less so
Yeah.
that people can get the validation, the information, the treatment options, and the hope that they need to keep moving forward in some way.
Yeah. Yep. That is so great. I can't remember if I told you before when we connected. I'm in the review process of a book from my perspective, from my accident as well. I didn't have the pituitary stuff to share there, so I will definitely be advertising your book as well because
Oh, thank you.
it's just a like I said, everybody's experience is a little bit different. So sharing all
Mhm.
these different perspectives just gives people more information.
Yeah.
So exactly, so that their journey hopefully doesn't suck as much.
Yeah, because like I said, I was given a 2-page handout and told that I'd be fine in 2 weeks. And so I didn't have any of these resources. And if someone had said, like, hey, here's a book. Now, granted, I understand a lot of TBI folks have difficulty reading.
Yeah,
So have somebody that like read it for you or to
yeah,
you, so that you can still get the info. But still, if someone had even said, here's a resource for you, that would have been so helpful. And there are others out there too, but this one's short.
yeah,
It's only 100 pages, so it's short. I tried to like be really concise too and be mindful of
yeah.
people's attention spans and all of that too, because I'm there with you. I get it.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't read. That was one of those that couldn't read for a long time.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't have been something that I would have been able to read myself. But even when I got handouts from our Brain Injury Alliance here in Minnesota, I looked at my husband and I'm like, well, you're going to have to help me with these
Hmm.
because I can't do that part. But yeah, it's just more information, more opportunities from people who've been there. So yeah, I appreciate that. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about your book, about your
Yeah.
projects?
My website, which is headofhope.com, has got info on the book, and you can certainly get it there. It is on Amazon as well. Probably a little easier to find via my website.
Yeah,
I am on social media, not all of them, but I am on Facebook and Instagram, and I do have a YouTube channel for Head of Hope that does have a lot of videos. So I do go into things in video that some are in the book, but there are also some things that have happened since the book came out. So
yeah,
there's even like a whole presentation on going through the Social Security disability process and things like that too, and just kind of I call my TBI diaries
yeah.
series, that just things that you experience, or that I should say I experience on a regular basis or have in the past, and just share again what it's like, and just being real with the experience, and letting people know that they're not alone. Like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, you too. Oh, it's not just me. Whew.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was my favorite thing with the people that I connected, that it's sharing those moments that, oh, I'm not the only person that had that.
Yeah,
So yeah, I will include all of your links to everything in the show notes so that people
thank
can
you.
find you easily. Because if they're driving, I don't want them trying to write things down. So
Definitely.
yeah. And again, for sake of both of our times here, any last words you wanted to close on before we wrap up?
Yeah, it's easy and cliche to say don't give up. So instead, I'll say keep moving forward.
Mhm,
And this path is not clearly marked, and it's not linear in any way, but asking for support, learning how to receive it,
mhm.
and also how to effectively advocate for yourself, and learning how to make the most of your life, even with the challenges, can help you keep moving forward. It may be in a different direction than you wanted to go. Um, but again, it's moving forward in some way, however that looks to you in the moment.
Mhm. Good words to end on. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
being here today, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this with others to help me continue on with my mission to help people live healthier, happier lives. Go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to see what I'm up to and get links to all the social medias there. See you next time.